All right, switching, kind of continuing the conversation, but moving to talking about yet another one of our legendary coaches with the Mustangs, and that being Larry Haylor. I know joined Greg Marshall still with us, joined by Donnovan Bennett, Andy Fantuz, and Tom McConnell. Kind of everybody with a different kind of perspective and a different angle here. So first, I'm going to go to the player side of things, and just before we kind of started to record here, Greg was mentioning about Donovan's article on sportsnet.ca when that article came together extremely quickly and was obviously, a lot of people said it was extremely impactful on a very tough day. Donovan, first to you, your initial, you've shared your thoughts of Larry, but you've said even since then, more kind of has come to mind. How tough was it to kind of bring that into obviously just the article format, and then how many more stories have come to light and come to mind since?
So many. My phone is still getting push alerts from guys sharing stories on Facebook and on different group chats. And I think the toughest piece about writing that article is one, how do you in a sense eulogize someone who meant so much to so many people? But I was writing it in disbelief that he was gone. Like still to this day we're having this conversation and it doesn't really make sense to me. Like Larry was a superhero. I felt like he was going to live forever. So I think that is the toughest part. And just knowing when I'm writing it, like I'm never going to be able to talk to him, pick his advice, see him in the press box when I come back to Western and do games and talk to him and check up on him and his family and his grandchildren. But I think the biggest thing for me, and I love seeing a former teammate of mine and Tuz and Andy and obviously coach, and one of the things for me with Larry that I didn't express, and there's so many, is Andy was a great player. Like I was a nice player to have. Andy's a player you need to have, right? Like there's a difference. And Larry, one of his I think his greatest strengths was that he treated everyone fairly, not equally, treated them fairly. And so Andy might be able to get away with some things that I couldn't. He has a great player, but he was able to manage all of these different personalities, all these different skill sets. People from, if you're at Western, across the country, not just across London or the province. He was able to manage them differently and understand what they needed. So he had some rules. Listen, if you are not 2 minutes early for a meeting, you're 2 minutes late. And I'm like, all right, take it easy, Tom Coughlin. Like if you want the meeting to start earlier, just say it's going to start 2 minutes earlier. But now that I'm in, a business setting, I totally get it. I totally understand that you can't just be there when you need to be. You have to be there prepared to execute when you're supposed to. Now, he would obviously always say to Tuz, Fantuz, you know what? If you're a pro, I'd fine your ass. And he could say that because he knew Fantuz was going to be a pro and he was getting him ready for that experience. But also, like, he wouldn't find my ass. He would bench my ass if I was 2 minutes late. So he understood how to manage the different personalities. And I think it's one of the greatest gifts. When you look at Greg as a head coach, when you look at, Michael Folds as a head coach, like you see small glimpses of Larry in them. And I think, that ultimately is going to be his legacy.
I feel like we have to go to Andy now, and I almost feel like I'm in like a political debate where I have to say you were mentioned. So rebuttal or
No, DJ was right. Totally. He had Larry had a bit of a soft spot for me, or definitely treated me a little bit differently than everyone else. Like he would be at his desk in Thames Hall with stacks of papers in the off season. He'd be reaming somebody out, like calling him, if he didn't know him that well, hey guy, just call him Guy instead of like their name. And then I'd walk in and he'd be like, what's up, Tuz? How you doing, bud? And but DJ's right that like he knew I had a little bit of I don't know, I had discipline or punctuality. Like I needed some guidance and some direction, and he certainly brought that out of me on the football field. And when it comes to that urgency and that full force ahead execution of like what we're trying to do and accomplish. He instilled that into me like no other coach ever had. Yeah, I mean, where do you start with Larry? I mean, it's but for me, that was the biggest takeaway, is that he kind of taught me that, you know, that what makes you successful on the football field and those lessons and those qualities that you learn from the game of football is what's going to make you successful later in life and anything you do and all the relationships you build throughout life. And he was the first and the main person that really instilled that into me. And I know that like football, that's one of the best things about football, but Larry was a very special mind at delivering that appropriately, like DJ said, to all these different individuals from different backgrounds with different personalities. He had a very unique way of delivering a message with very timely pauses and some quirky accents here and there, but maybe a little bit of spit here and there too. But he knew when to be intense, and he knew when to like develop the drama in the speech, and then just hit you with the punch, and it was just powerful every time. That's the main the main takeaways from me. Like, he was just a very special mentor and leader amongst large groups. Could read a room like no other.
Tom delivering a message, you and Larry delivering the Mustangs broadcast on Newstalk 1290 CJBK for a number of years, and you guys doing the broadcast. And I know obviously having the on-field connection with Larry as well. For how did that? Obviously, there's the connection of the being of playing the game. Is that how the connection of the broadcast kind of came together? Or
yeah, you know, going back to what Donnovan said, players may not have been treated equally, but they were treated fairly. And so I remember, unlike these three guys, I wasn't recruited. I walked on at Western. And the first day I met Larry was training camp. It's like testing day. And he came up to me, "Hi, Tom, Larry Haylor." And he shook my hand. And then after that, right, it didn't matter where you were from, didn't matter how hard he recruited you. It was about performance on the field. And it was about, you know, were you doing the job or were you not doing the job? And we had on our team, especially in 94, I don't think we were the most talented of teams. We had a lot of talent. We had some big personalities, though, and we had some characters. And Larry never tried to be like out character you or be a bigger personality or suppress. Greg can attest. Like we have some very loud players on that team. I don't even think I'm the loudest. Like maybe one of the loudest. I don't even know if I was the loudest. And Larry would butt heads, but would never like try to go over the top and show you who was the boss. He was always trying to work with you and work with your talent and your personality and your attributes and channel that on the field, which I think was a real testament to how he identified talent and got it pointed in the right direction. And so made sure we were all going this way, as diverse and as outspoken and as crazy as we were. I mean, earlier you were talking about, Darwin and making sure personal accountability. And, you know, if you're going to go to the Seeps on Thursday night and make sure, it's like, we went to the Seeps every night. Like we did not pay attention to that. We were like the bad examples. Do not follow those guys. This is not, but Larry, as long as we won, Larry put up with it and just made sure we were ready on game days and just made sure. And so when our relationship ended as a player, I go back and I'm like, oh, the lessons you learned and the respect. And we also had, Larry had his kids starting to play at that time. So Jordan was a teammate of mine. So Larry, I also saw as a parent of a player. So at about that time, they started the Mustang Moms. So that was, for parents to get together before the game and cheer on their kids. And so Larry socialized with the parents more. He socialized with my parents and other parents. And so you kind of saw a different side of him away from the sideline and away from the film room that, softened the image of Larry a bit. And he was a little more human. And he was a little more approachable. But he was always, game first, player first. And then you respected him afterwards. And then it was really interesting to connect with him as a broadcaster because we had that relationship from the field, but he was, I'm going to say, somewhat of a different guy, softer, gentler, kinder. I mean, I used the line before at the Hall of Fame dinner, and he's was more Ted Lasso and less Ted Asshole. And that was the difference. That was, he wasn't the kind, gentle coach. That's what I needed, though. I didn't need a kind, gentle coach. I had a great dad. I had great brothers. I didn't need a friend. I didn't need any of that. I need a football coach who wanted to win. That's what Larry was. And as a broadcaster, he was so insightful and funny and self-deprecating, and he was just always prepared. That was the one thing, as Andy said, be prepared, be ready. Oh, he had notes and he had preparation on the other team. I didn't know what to expect. Larry was prepared. Larry was really prepared as a broadcaster. So that made my job super easy. Anyway, it was great to connect with him. And I got to see the different side as the father. I got to see how many former players would come up and how proud he was of them. I got to see him bask in, his grandchildren when they visited the booth and how he just lit up. I got to see really both sides of Larry, and it was the softer, gentler side at the end where he was just such, still a great communicator and just so caring about the people who played for him.
Greg, the caring aspect, I know that was a big aspect when we spoke a couple weeks ago when he passed. You wrote a quote for an article we did for the Mustangs website, and you said the big aspect was how much he cared. That when life events happened, Larry was always kind of the one that he called you on a multitude of occasions. How important was that aspect? Because as you said, it was the mentor and the man that was always there.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about. Tom nailed it. I think everyone here was fortunate to know Larry, not just the competitive Larry on the sideline, that emotional, passionate coach that was so competitive on game day. I was fortunate that I when I finished playing, Larry brought me back as a coach. He was the first one when I retired as a professional football player to offer for me to come back and help him coach. I went to him when I was thinking about going to McMaster and being the head coach there. He said, "Oh man, you thought you were the head coach here 3 years ago. It's time for you to go." But I needed his blessing. 4 years into that, when Michael Kirkley, tragically was killed in that plane crash, and I found out I had to cut short my practice at McMaster. First time ever that I've done that, and drive to London and go see Larry. I mean, he was the first one to call me when I got fired by the Ticats to say, you know what, this might work out. I'm kind of thinking that I'm kind of near the end, and would you consider coming back to Western? As different as Darwin and Larry were on the field, they were so alike in everything else that they did, and what they were great role models, and they cared. And the people that knew Larry saw him not as this, competitive, emotional coach on the sidelines. They saw him as an outstanding father, outstanding husband, and a great role model who cared about his players. That was what we saw, and what we learned. And I always said this, Larry, who spent hours and hours because he forced me to, because I was the offensive line coach when he was the head coach. The hours he spent in preparation, meticulous, driven. But then he's over there playing with his kids, and taking Jen to her basketball games and Matt and Jordan to the hockey games, and doing it. There was no Larry time. Larry didn't have hobbies. It wasn't like Larry golfed a lot in the last 20 years. He didn't golf when he was coaching. He didn't have any hobbies, didn't go fishing, didn't do barbecues. He was a husband and a father, and he coached football. That was it. He was an unselfish, caring man who, when I found out that Darwin passed away, I just needed to be with Larry. And
From that side of
ended there.
things, it's understandable. From that, to Andy, for you, sort of thing. How many times later on in kind of the football timeline did you kind of go that things pop in your head and you're like, "Ah, he told me that. Oh yeah, I remember he said that," sort of thing. Were the things that happened on the front of the time, and you're kind of going, "Wait a second. Oh yeah, that happened too," and those later on in lifetime sort of thing that were Larry insinuated. Oh, I think you're muted there, Andy.
Thanks.
He wins the bingo game because somebody's got to be on mute.
Yeah, I went to the next step, and when I went out to Saskatchewan, I mean, Larry's from there, and he gave me some parting words, and I kind of took those lessons that I was we were sort of talking about earlier, and I was just completely focused and driven and working my tail off, kind of in a different way at the next level. And I got those lessons from Larry, you got to hit it fast, you got to hit it hard, and and be prepared and do everything you can to give yourself an advantage. And that's, it's coach it for me. I think what separated me was sort of the craftiness on the field. And I got a lot of that from Larry just by listening to how he would break down like the defense and talk about it from a quarterback perspective of when is the quarterback looking to throw and what's going to be the easiest target for him. And so I think just the discipline and the work ethic is the main things I got from Larry. But kind of to echo to Greg a bit, I mean, after I finished at Western, I mean, even my last year, I had that crazy leg accident, and I didn't think I might not walk again, let alone play football again. And he came and visited me in the hospital like 3 times, and just no talk about football at all. Just, you got one of your star players here that might not ever play again, and he's in there just as like a friend and a to me and a family to me. And then later on in life, he DJ talked about how good of or maybe it was Tom, about how good of a writer he was. He did a special for TSN, and I'm just looking, like, as when I heard the news a couple of weeks ago, I was kind of looking back at some of these articles, and he certainly had a way of words and presenting things. And then we connected on the golf course, and we had this annual golf outing with a couple former players and Larry, like Johnny Shahade and Matt Baxter. And it was always Larry and I against Johnny and Matt. And Matt wasn't one of his favorite players because he chose baseball over football. And so Larry didn't like that. And kind of a funny story is we were on it might have been the 18th green, and Matt drained this putt to beat us this one year. And I picked up the ball and I just kind of tossed it over to Matt, and he pulled like one of these like no look behind the back catches. And Larry looks at him, looks over at me, and he's like, "Nice throw, Toos." Like he was like, of course it was the throw, the underhand throw that, but anyway, I'm kind of rambling a bit there, but those are just some of the to me, that family first and that friendship first mentality is what really separated him from the rest. And as I got going on in my career, I came across many different coaches, positional and head coaches, and the ones that really cared about you, and it wasn't just a front, I guess you could say, and they didn't just say they cared, like a lot like Greg is. I mean, the ones that really care about who you are and who you are as a person, developing you as a person and helping mold you into a better man will ultimately help the football team. But that was the priority. Those are the ones that really leave that lasting impact on myself or anybody that they come across.
Donnovan, obviously doing games, and you've done the big games this year, sort of thing. And how many times when you're breaking down a game, or you're doing color commentary for some of the big games in the OUA, are you automatically going back to some of those lessons learned when you're on the field, obviously, in some of those and even listening to the games, because I get the enjoyment of clipping those highlights, sort of thing. And you're even said a few times, I remember when Larry Haylor did this, or even looking at the ways that Greg's doing things for Mustang games and kind of saying, there's the Larry Haylor influence.
No question. Not even, just U Sports games. When I'm watching, games, whether it's CFL, NFL, NCAA, at home, I'm pausing things, I'm rewinding, I'm pointing things out to my wife and my 2.5-year-old child, who both don't care. But, I'm looking at the game still today through the eyes of Larry. And, I talked about the legacy that he has, via the coaches, and there's so much that we could talk about his impact on coaching in Canada and even just in amateur sport in Canada. But, between, myself, Dwayne Ford, Pierre Vercheval, you have people with authority who've spoken about the game, and when they're actually speaking, but it's really Larry talking. Like, we all see the game through his eyes. And so that's part of his influence as well. It's funny because, he's got, his philosophies in terms of, football. And, I wrote it in the article. He started running the wing tee, and he was like a progressive guy in Canada running the wing tee. And then by the time he leaves, whether it was, Coach Samways as the offensive coordinator, or Greg when he came back, as a coach in waiting, he's running, zone read concepts, RPOs, things that, we're now seeing obviously at all levels of football. And so his ability to change over time was one of his greatest strengths. But some things fundamentally, I believe, and again, it's because I get it from him, in football don't change. And I don't think it's coincidence that, we obviously lost Larry and we lost Darwin this year. But they both went out watching a Western team win the Vanier Cup with principles that didn't change from when they were head coaches. And it was specifically when you talk about Larry, dumb will get you beat. Everyone wants to recruit great athletes. He wanted to recruit smart athletes. And part of that is you got to get them into school. But another part is you want them to be assignment correct, to be coaches on the field. And when you look at, that Western team that just won a Vanier Cup, smart team, young quarterback, smart quarterback, didn't beat themselves, weren't heavily penalized. And then there's things about, Larry's teams, Western football teams. They're going to get off the bus and they're going to run the football. And obviously this team continues that tradition. And they're going to make big plays defensively. They're going to turn over the ball and give, short fields to their offense. And the last thing is, we always talk about, who's a genius coach, who can scheme him up. It's still a game that we overcomplicate that comes down to fundamentals. And Larry loved the fundamentals, spending time in spring camp, in training camp, going through those things and knowing that when you do that over time, when you add them up, they're going to make you successful. And that was a fundamentally sound football team. The sport is about running, catching, and tackling. And essentially, if you do those things better than your opponent, chances are you're going to win. And so it's a credit to Greg for, not, losing some of those lessons that he got from Larry. And just one of the idiosyncrasies that he had, and there's so many, is Larry was obsessed with hips. Like, he might as well be Shakira. Everything, whether you're throwing the football, he's talking about your hips, talking about tackling, bring your hips through, drive blocking, wear your hips. And so he would always talk about, having a pelvic thrust and hips. And so in the background, there's guys dying laughing, but he was dead serious. And it was, again, part of, wanting to imprint on us the fundamentals of football.
I think that kind of transitions nicely to what I was going to. We've had a little bit of emotion, so I want to try and lighten it a little bit. And I'm going to go to Tom first for the fun stories of Larry Haylor, because there's the on the field stuff. Is there kind of a funny, or it's not kind of something lighthearted that kind of comes to mind outside of the fact that he may or may not been on the the admission list for the last last couple of years under a certain new sports information person who he swears that did not put him on the list.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me start with that story. And as much as Donnovan talked about hips, which is interesting how much we talk about hips and core strength these days, hand position is embedded in my head from both Larry and not hand position, talking about 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and hand position was like, if I see a receiver reach for one hand, two hands, Tom, two hands, always two hands, always two hands. One hand, that's showmanship. Two hands always. How many times I see that? The funny thing was, I want to get to, I got a film room story, but I'll talk about, I walk in to game day and walk up to the bench and, hi, Tom here. Oh, hi, Tom. How are you? Here's your name. Here's your wristband. No problem. There you go. Have a great call. See you. And they recognize me for no reason other than maybe, I don't know, I say hello every week. Every week, Larry is on the list and they can't find him on the list. Every week, they can't find Larry. I'm sorry, who are you, sir? I'm on the Larry Haylor. And in his mind, he's like, you don't know who I am? Like, are you kidding me? You don't know who I am? So he goes through this whole rigmarole with these part-time, work placement students who are there probably just to get their hours. And they're like, oh, there you are. Okay. All right. Thank you. And I hear about it for 5-10 minutes. It's the first conversation we have. Were you on the list? Were you on the, I go, of course I was on the list, Larry. They walked me in, escorted me. Thanks, Mr. McConnell. See you later. And I was like, great. I wasn't on the list. They couldn't find me. It was like, and I'm like, don't they know who you are? Don't they know who you are, Larry?
That was my favorite. Is one time I got a call on my phone in the press box from somebody at the front door. Hi, Ryan, we have somebody at the front door looking to get in. Is it okay? And I was like, what's their name? Hold on and say, what's your name? Larry Haylor. I went, let him in.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So Larry, when you're a player and it's straightforward, it is no BS. And one of the things that I think has been part of my success is going through a film room for 5 years and having an honest assessment of what you did. And Donnovan in the media, Andy in the media, anyone in the media knows that in the media, we sometimes work with delicate egos. So telling someone they weren't quite right, or we could do this better, or this wasn't perfect, sometimes takes some finessing. And it's one of the, well, maybe we could have done this, that like the straightforward talk. And then when you get in film room and you're pointed out right there, and Greg's part of it, and Larry's part of it, and your position coach is part of it. What is that? What are you doing right there? What is the play? And they're breaking down. When you make a mistake, they'll point it out. When you do something good, they'll point it out. But telling you straight up, no BS, this is what you did right, this is what you did wrong. This is good, this is not good, is great in terms of developing an ability to accept constructive criticism and saying this is what has to happen for us to be successful. And so in football, every play you can kind of gauge, was it successful or not? And it's like, yep, we got 6 yards, we got 12 yards, we got sacked, we got a touchdown. We have an outcome right away in football that you can say this play was a success or this play was not a success. And in a lot of jobs, it's not quite like that. But the ability to, the film doesn't lie. The tape is not lying. I'm looking at that. This is what you did. This is what you did right, or this is what you did wrong, is really beneficial to go through that process and hear and build on that. Accept the criticism, go back to the practice field, learn from it, and become a better player. And I think by going through that, and it's not just at Western, but I only did it at Western, helped me as a person accept my shortcomings, build on them, correct them, do better next time. We always want to try to get better. And Larry was a talker and had his phrases, alignment dictates responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. But the best was when Larry made a mistake. Or Larry just sometimes didn't get the language quite right and was just off. And so we had a play and we're in film room and it's everybody. All right, look at this. Receiver against the DB. It's 1-on-1. Macho a macho. And we're looking at each other like, Mano a mano is what you mean? So macho a macho became one of our catchphrases for the rest of the year. When Larry never, hey, knock it off. He accepted he made a mistake. He was full in on the mistake, though, too. Macho a macho. And we're like, macho a macho? As someone who took Spanish 002, mano a mano, Larry, man to man. It was great. It was when Larry made a mistake. Everyone knew it. We had a player, Andreas Nolte. He was a first-year player, and he was a running back, and he was from Central. And we always gave every first-year player nicknames. And because his last name was Nolte, his nickname, of course, was Nick. So Nick would do the plays, and he's third string, fourth string, whatever. And we're like, come on, Nick, let's go. Hey, Nick, good play, Nick. All right, Nick. And Nick screwed up. And Larry, not fully knowing his name, yelled at him, Nicholas, what are you doing? His name's Andreas, Larry, not Nicholas. But he only knew him as Nick because everyone called him Nick. And so he was Nicholas for the rest of his career at Western, not Andreas. So there's 1,000 Larry stories out there. And usually he's the one, when he makes that rare mistake, everyone pounces on it.
Greg, I know you've got a couple fun Larry stories, so I feel like I should just kind of let the floor go because I'm sure there's one or two to kind of.
Yeah, a lot of funny ones.
And remember, it's a podcast. You're allowed to say whatever you want.
Yeah, no. One thing about my relationship with Larry that was different than Darwin, in that Larry was the offensive coordinator when I was a player, so I was directly responsible and interacted with Larry on every single practice. And then when I started back into the assistant coach, that was the time. And Donnovan nailed it. Like, the guy knew, like, he and I sat and he drew up plays for hours and hours every single night. I get home at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Larry drawing the same plays up, but just meticulous in it. But I would say that I don't ever remember Darwin and I having an argument, like, or any crosswords. Larry and I, those years that I coached with them, my goodness, on the sidelines, I guess we're just too much alike. Yelling and swearing at each other, and he's throwing the headsets down because I'm up in the booth, and you get down here right now, and I'm not coming. All of those, and you know what? It never. When it was over, it was over. That was it. Game's over, or 2 minutes later, hey, Greg, my man, what's going on? It's like, that was Larry, and that's, Nigel kind of laughed about it. He said, I was listening to this song on the way over, and I'm not sure who it was by, but it reminded me of Larry, that, for anything to grow, there's got to be a little rain. And it wasn't for our relationship. And I had an amazing relationship with Larry and a really good friend, but there's times we, got after it a little bit, never personal, always about football, but we did. But Larry came into the huddle when we were, I think probably when I was my third or fourth year, as he generally did, and blew up on us. Like, if you got, let us have it, yelling at us that if you don't want to work hard, you're not going to practice properly, know your assignments. Why don't we just take it in? And, and Mike Kirkley's, we're in the huddle. Mike's on the fullback, Mike's a tailback, and Mike looks up and goes, Larry. And Larry just keeps ranting on over top of him. And he goes, hey, Larry, what is it, Michael? He goes, Larry, did you cry when old Yeller died? It was like, Larry just says, what, what's he going to do? And he tried not to hold back a laugh. He turned and just walked away. So, yeah. Mike Kirkley had a way to kind of get under Larry, because he had this funny way about him. But they're both a lot alike. But, yeah, lots of good stories about Larry, and really, really great memories. I mean, I'm kind of with DJ on this one. I just can't believe that it's hard to process that he's gone, and that it's one of those guys that just was so impactful, and just thought he'd be here forever.
Andy, same to you. Any fun memories, funny memories? I'm trying to keep it as light as possible. I know it's a tough subject, obviously, and a tough topic to we're all dealing with.
Yeah, the news certainly hit hard. I really liked how Larry at the end of a game approached the sort of the breakdown. He really instilled the stick together mentality, and it was, we win as a team, we lose as a team. It's like, take care of each other, make good decisions, go and celebrate. And, he'd be out there with us, out at the seats with us, and having a couple beers and just really enjoying being a part of the group, even though it was up to that point, it was just so intense all week long. Going from the night before the game, we used to walk over behind the Ivy building there and go up on that hill, run up the hill a few times, and then he'd give his speech. And like kind of mentioned it before, but like he's using those some of those famous lines that he had and spitting all over, and just it was so intense. And I kind of took that later in my career, my pro career, and when I became one of the team captains, and I started to give the speech, and like DJ can attest to this, I wasn't much of a verbal, like a talker in my Western days, and definitely not in my early days. I was more of just a smiler and do my job kind of thing, and have a big grin and have fun, but wasn't a motivational speaker amongst the team. But I sort of took that on from Larry later in my career, and even when it was almost a totally different generation of players, and I was the old guy on the team, but just getting fully immersed in the pregame speech and the intensity of it would fire anybody up. And so both, I guess, the pregame and then the postgame are things that kind of stick with me.
I know everybody's got a busy schedule. Any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up here on the man, whether it be the on-field side of the things or the away from the field side of things? The floor is open.
Yeah, I'll start with some. I mean, I think one of the things Greg mentioned, and him basically calling Greg back home to London, and I want to underscore that, because that was Larry. Larry loved winning, and he loved coaching, and it defined him. But he also loved the university and the program, and he wanted what was best for the university and the program. And it would have been really easy for Larry to continue to coach, roll off 6-7 wins a year, put his wins record, further in the distance. But he ultimately knew this is a special opportunity with a special individual who loves this city, university, and program as much as I do. Ego aside, I think this is what makes sense. And, that, to me, I think Larry's exit defines Larry's entire legacy right there. And the fact that, he so graciously, shared that platform with Greg, and then, gave it everything he had in that last year. And the most disappointed I've been, as an athlete, was that we didn't do better for him in that last year. He deserved more, and certainly, that's one of my regrets. But there's so many Larryisms, if you will, that really stick with me. Too, as you mentioned, going to the hill and running, touch and peel, because you'd run up that hill and touch the tree and kind of peel back. And he talked to us about the ghosts of Mustangs past, and obviously J.W. Little was around there, but it was a trek to go across campus from TD and do that. And that was one of the first things that Greg's like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. You guys, there's a small hill in the back. You guys can run up it and run back down it if you want, but we're not doing that. Save your life. But Larry really, really cared about that tradition. But one of the ways that the two of them are the exact same is, boy, do you love chewing out referees. Man, Larry, why don't you just put their sweater on? Why don't you? Oh, a referee has never had a good game when Larry was the head coach. I'm like, 67? What's your number? Turn around. Let me see your number. 67. I'm going to report your ass. Love to chew out the referees. Would shake their hand afterwards. But in between those whistles, man, good luck. But he was hard on everybody. We talked about how he was hard on players, but he was hard on coaches, and he understood the players he could be hard on. And sometimes if he couldn't be hard on a player, he would chew out that position coach to get to that player. Poor Nigel, who always had to hear it from Larry because one of his receivers wasn't blocking downfield or didn't have the right distribution on a route. So, I think, those gray hairs that came to Nigel real fast, they came because of Fantuz, not because of anything that Nigel did. But there's in every generation and every team, there were certain players that Larry really loved and gravitated towards. And he would say, you know what, gentlemen, I would go to war with 1,000 fill in the blank. I would go to war with 1,000 Mike Bonks. I would go to war with 1,000 Dwayne Fords, whoever it was at the time. And that was something that Larry, was known for because he was a grinder and he gravitated towards people who were grinders, who really were going to give everything, not just on Saturday, but all of those days in between. And, Greg talked about him, drawing up plays and, giving us these ready sheets and cursive, which was another blessing that Greg actually knew how to type so we could actually understand everything in the ready sheet. But he had so many offensive plays and concepts in his mind that I remember as a running back, I'd be beside him on the sideline. He kind of touched the small of your back as he's trying to push you in to get you in the game and get in a play. And he would be like, I want to go. And it's like, where do you want to go, Larry? Like the play clock is running out. What play are we running? But he had so many great ideas that he didn't know how he wanted to go after a defense. And him on the sideline, another trait that he and Greg share is if someone on the field does something incorrectly, the wrath is for everyone around him. So the left tackle messes up and everyone around him is hearing about it and not the players on the field. And God love him. If he doesn't know what hash mark the ball is going to be on, everybody's what hash? What hash? I don't know, Larry. I'm standing beside you. We're looking at the same game. So how do I know what hash? But that was him. And the last thing is he was a competitor. And, I wrote in the article, dare to be great is the quote that he often would say and reference that I stick with. And obviously the man in the arena, is who counts, not the critic. And certainly broadcasting it being so subjective and competitive, it's something that really impacts me. But he would often say to us, well, gentlemen, we'll play them on the 401. I don't care. We'll play them right now. I don't care. And he really meant it. And I was like, well, is the exit ramp going to be the sideline? How are we doing comebacks? That makes no sense logically. But he was trying to impress upon us that all of the pomp and circumstance doesn't matter. What matters is the group right here, what we do, our preparation. Don't worry about anyone or anything else. And I think, when I mentioned that legacy that he has, when you look at the program that Greg went and built at Mac, when you look at what Greg has done since at Western, when you look at what other coaches that are part of, Larry's tree and or now part of Greg's tree, that is the constant, that they all got from Larry, whether or not they directly were impacted with him. So he is, for me, the most influential person in Canadian amateur football. That's his legs.
Does anybody want to try and follow that?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it, DJ. Just like you did in that story you wrote. It was perfect. I know we redid the locker room. Still, it's an ongoing process, but I will tell you, I will make sure that we get a new Dare to Be Great sign with Larry's name underneath it. I don't know where Larry got that saying from, or if that was a Roosevelt one, or who he got it from. But from this point on, Larry's name will be under that quote hanging in our locker room.
Any final thoughts, gentlemen? Andy, Tom, before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I'll just say one final thing. It was, and I'm going to get emotional here. And I don't even know if I can get through this because the last 9 years, he kind of filled in for my father, how I'd connect with them. And sorry. All right. So I asked him once. So I took on a management role in my company, and I asked him, I had to let a guy go. And he was like, all right, lay it on me. And he kind of guided me through the process of how to do that, which is difficult when you've never let anyone go. And it's like, all right, is he a team player? You know, do you need him on your team? I'm like, no. And I went through all this, and he's like, all right, well, you just got to tell him he's out. Like, that's it. And it was great. I was like, yeah, I just got to rip off the bandage. That's all I got to do. And of course, Larry followed up. So what did you do? And I'm like, well, I let him go, Larry. Like he was really vested. And this conversation took part on a road trip to Windsor. Like, Larry and I went on road trips together. So I tell him the story on this road trip to Windsor. And then the next thing, he's like, all right, did you let him go? And I'm like, yes, I let him go. So he told my parents, and Andy, maybe he told you this, how great you were, but he'd never tell other players how good they were. And he wouldn't be like, you know, you were fantastic. But he told my parents one of the best compliments I ever had. You just had to point him towards the field. And I'm like, oh, that was so nice. That was great. And then Larry and I, we got together. We were together for 9 years. And we'd exchange emails, you know, just like, hey, Larry, Merry Christmas. All right, all the best. See you next year. All the best to the kids, blah, blah, blah. And so we exchanged emails this Christmas. Hey, Larry, I'll get you paid. I've submitted your invoice and the check will be coming. And they sent me something back. And then he said to me, you're the reason I do the games. That's it. You're the reason I do the games. And for me, I'm just like, what are you like? Oh my God, like that. And he felt that way. He was so proud of his players. Donnovan, he was so proud of what you did. He was so proud. The only guy more proud of you know, than what you did was of Dwayne Ford, who couldn't have done anything better. I think he was most proud of 40. And maybe it was his way, going back to the position coach, of motivating me. Tom, did you see Dwayne Ford last night? Wow, is 40 good? 40 is so good on those broadcasts, staring right at me. Like, come on, pick your game up or something like that. But, you know, just that simple communication. And I'm like, wow. And for that, you know, it was just, I don't think I can receive, you know, a compliment higher than that. And he made sure to tell me, which that was the last thing he said to me. And so for me, I'm just like, oh my God, like that to leave there. Like, that's why, you know, Ryan, when you called me, sorry, that to go on that journey. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to find out, you know, if this is, what an awful assignment you gave me. And I'm like calling around, and I'm calling old players, and I'm calling, you know, Lori Bartolotta and Todd McKay if they've heard. And we're like, oh my God, we can't hear. And for Donnovan, for you to that story, I was in shock. I have never taken a day off work, and I took Friday off because I was in such shock. I had to process that thing all weekend. And then finally Sunday, I'm able to put something together. Like, what an amazing thing you did over, like, crystallizing what I think we all kind of felt. And I'm in shock. Greg's in shock. Everyone I talked to was in shock. And for you to do that, I think meant so much for all of us, really, to put into words what he meant. And it really, I tell you, it helped me over the weekend. So I can be like, he was a good man. He was a great man. He meant a lot to all of us. So, guys, on that note, I'm so sorry. It's like when I went on the air after my mom died. I'm like, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to tough it out. I'm going to do this. But I think, you know, he was tough. He was fair. But in his way, that's why we loved him. That's why we loved him. So I'll leave it there. And I'll let you cut this last 5 minutes out.
No, that's good. That was good.
Mr. Fantuz, apparently you were a fan favorite of Larry, so I think we'll maybe give you the final word to you.
Donnovan, I loved how you said that I'll go to war with 1,000, and actually you were what the name he would use many times because you were so tough, but I got an opportunity to go on a call like this last Friday with probably 35 ex-players, a lot of which I played with. A few were a few years before my time, and to hear, you know, it was sort of just like say your name, what years you played, and a story about Larry. And, you know, for 35 different stories to come out and make everybody laugh, and we're there for a couple hours, like really is his legacy to me. And you guys did such a good job today of kind of expressing that. But to be able to like kind of, you know, I got hit in the head a few times, so to be able to remember some of those stories, I was just cracking up, like one after another, and that really is his legacy. Is just the impact he had, the positive impact he had on everybody. He came everybody who had an experience with him throughout their lifetime, really says, you know, how special of a person he was.
Well, gentlemen, I know this has been a tough time, and we've all shared a tear or two here. But I wanted to thank you all for doing this and sharing some stories. And at the same point, you know, giving recognition to a great man. And you know, this has been a tough little bit, but it's been a good one. So thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it, guys.